Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Simon Milner. I work for Facebook. I was musing on why Laura asked me to chair the session, and then I remembered it was my idea. But it's also, I think, related to the fact that I'm a father. I'm a father of kids, and therefore issues around how I keep my kids safe when they're on the internet in my home is obviously important to me, as it is to other parents of kids of a certain age. I used to work for BT as well, as some of you will know. I ran their policy team, and therefore things have come a long way since I left BT 2.5 years ago. And indeed, that's what we talked about at the previous IGF. Was we got the ISPs on the platform, and we asked them to explain what they were up to, why they were up to it in terms of these whole home filtering solutions that all four of the main fixed line ISPs have now adopted, how those worked, and we had a good debate about it. And what I felt we needed to do, and hopefully the fact that you stayed means that you agreed, is take that a stage further now. Because certainly one of the things we all should have a concern about is other people looking at the UK model and suggesting, well, given that the UK has adopted network level filtering, then we should be able to do that too for the things that we care about. And that's always been one of our concerns about how this debate might develop. So I thought it'd be useful to hear from a couple of different organisations, and I'm pretty sure Fosey hasn't spoken at IGF before. Maybe I'm wrong, Dave, have you? Okay. But certainly one organisation that hasn't, and that's the BBFC, because Dave Austin, as he's going to explain, is part of has already been involved in filtering, helping the mobile broadband group and those mobile broadband operators operate their own filters. And I thought it would be useful for him to come on and explain what role the BBFC plays in that. Because there's an obvious question of, well, who decides? Who decides what gets blocked into different categories? And that's certainly a role that Dave and his team play, and he'll explain how that works. And then there is also a concern about overblocking. What happens when the wrong types of sites and content is blocked? That is not the intended purpose of the block, or maybe what the parent was hoping to block in terms of their children's access. And that's where David Miles, and I'm going to call them Dave and David for the purpose of this afternoon, that's where David Miles comes in. He chairs the UKIS, the UK Council for Child Internet Safety Overblocking Working Group. So he's going to brief us on how that's going, how is it operating, how are they working with organisations that might be concerned that their content is inappropriately blocked. We also, of course, at IGF want to get debate going, and there's nobody better for doing that than Jim Killock and the Open Rights Group, so I'm very delighted that Jim also agreed to join the group, and we'll come to him third. I've asked them to talk for no more than 8 minutes. I will cut them off after 10 if they overrun, and that will give us plenty of time for discussion. We will still aim to finish on time for our panel, so that Kate and Eleanor have got time for their panel before we wrap at 4 o'clock. So let me first of all ask Dave Austin to come along and talk to you. He's going to use the lectern, as I think all the speakers are. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Simon, and thanks for inviting me to this event. As you said, the BBFC's never spoken at this forum before. I'm going to focus purely on content issues. I'm not a technician. I'm hopeless when it comes to technology. So I will not touch that side of things at all, and please don't ask me any questions on it because I will not be able to answer. But I do know about content. The BBFC, just a few words about ourselves first, is the regulator of film and video in the UK. And in the physical world of cinemas and DVD and Blu-ray, our work is governed by statute. However, we've also developed a suite of voluntary self-regulatory services for companies which are active online. So, for example, we're working with VOD platforms such as iTunes and Netflix to ensure trusted ratings and content advice on those platforms. We're working with content providers from big Hollywood majors like Sony, Warner's, Paramount, to small independent film and video companies. And what's most relevant today is we're working with the 4 mobile network operators in the UK, the key ones, so EE, O2, 3 and Vodafone, which is what I'm going to talk about now. So in September last year, we became the regulator on a voluntary best practice basis of content delivered via mobile networks. So all internet and commercial content carried by those networks is subject to our regulation. We operate a binary system, so content that we would rate at 18 or above goes behind filters, and all other content doesn't. Our role is twofold in this process. First of all, we set the standards at which adult filters are set, and these standards are based on regular public consultations that we carry out. Every 4 years, we carry out a really big consultation, which lasts about a year. We interview up to, well, we used to carry out one last year. We interviewed 10,500 people. People fill in questionnaires, they take part in focus groups, one-to-one interviews, and we have a pretty good idea on the basis of these regular consultations what the British public thinks is acceptable at the different age ratings. We apply the same standards for content carried by the mobile networks that we do for film and video. So we set the standards, first of all, and those standards are transparent. You can find the standards on our website. The second thing we've done is we've worked with filtering companies that work for the mobile operators in advance to ensure that their categories... Sorry, let me take a step back. It wasn't completely straightforward, coming back to a point Simon raised, to match the standards operated by filtering companies to the standards that we apply based on these large-scale public consultations. The methodology is slightly different. We don't have categories as such. We have sort of levels of strength within categories. So you can have, if you can't take violence as a category, because you have sort of Tom and Jerry style slapstick cartoon violence, which is acceptable for all ages. But you can have really extreme violence in works like a Serbian film or The Human Centipede 2, which wouldn't be acceptable at all categories. So we had to work quite closely for several months with the filtering companies to ensure that their standards matched our standards. So that's the first thing, set the transparent, consistent standards. The second thing that we do is, because filters aren't perfect, we adjudicate in hard cases. So we operate a right of appeal so that anyone who thinks that there's been a case of overblocking or underblocking can come to us, and we will adjudicate on that case. We will take a look at the website and say, well, in this case, we would rate the website 18, or we wouldn't. And in that case, the mobile operator will either filter that website or not filter that website. We expect the mobile operators to deal with the easy cases, because there are quite a lot of really quite straightforward cases. I'll give you an example. There was a furniture company called BSM that appealed to us soon after we started work. It was our very first appeal, and they said, we've been categorised as a porn site. We had a look at the website in question. It's an office supplies company. They just supply desks, table lamps, that kind of thing, chairs. The filters have picked it up. BSM sounds a bit like BDSM, which is which was picked up as a fetish porn site. That's the kind of case that we dealt with at the beginning, but we're not dealing with anymore because the mobile operators are dealing with these really easy cases themselves, and we're only getting the hard cases. And issues that we've looked at in relation to websites are abortion, both pro and anti, racist content, male strip shows, sex chat lines, assisted dying, body piercings, sex education, and rape. So all these subject areas, websites dealing with these subject areas, have come to us, and we've given an adjudication. Do they need to go behind ad filters or not? So far, the system seems to be working well. We've been doing it for 9 months. We're applying consistent and transparent standards based on public opinion research, where there is a human backup should things go wrong to deal with any filtering challenges in relation to content. The volume of work is not overwhelming, but in line with the expectations of the mobile operators. We've adjudicated on around 20 websites in 9 months, which isn't a massive amount of content coming to us. And it's clear, as we've been working with the operators, that they are dealing with most of the cases of purported overblocking. One issue that's probably worth pondering, it's a binary system only, so it's either 18 and above or not. So it doesn't mean that if content is not filtered, it's suitable for everyone. Clearly there's content that we would rate 15 or 12, which doesn't go behind filters but isn't appropriate for 5, 6, 7-year-olds. We could apply a more granular system. At the moment, there's not the demand from the operators to do that, but we could, and we are working on a more binary sort of child-safe model based on our PG standards, which is kind of up to 8 years old. That's pretty much it. I should say that we have published at Jim's suggestion, because Jim came in to see us when we took on this role and said, yeah, you're kind of transparent, but you could be a bit more transparent. So he said that when we deal with these appeals against overblocking and underblocking, what we traditionally did, well, traditionally we've only been doing it for 9 months, but what we did in the first instance is we gave a report of our findings to the person complaining and the network in question. Jim suggested we ought to publish so everyone can read the findings of each case. So we've now done that. We've published 2 quarterly reports. The last one came out at the end of May, beginning of June. And there you find these on our websites. It details each of the appeals that we've dealt with. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. That's very helpful. And people do understand, don't they, that what we're talking about is the mobile broadband filters that are automatically switched on when people take a new account. And therefore it's up to them if they want to take that filtering off. Presumably everybody understands that. Okay, let's now hear from David Miles from the Family Online Safety Institute about the work he's been doing with the fixed line ISPs around overblocking. Over to you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation to speak today. I think before I start specifically about overblocking, I think it's worthwhile giving a bit of context. I've just come back from the CEO Coalition, European Commission CEO Coalition in Brussels, and one of the things that always amazes me is just how little attention is being paid to what's going on in the UK right now. Whether you agree or otherwise, we are going through a profound change in terms of online safety here in the UK, of which overblocking is just one element. And so I think it's worth saying that in the space of probably 15 to 18 months as a democracy, we are moving from a predominantly device-side approach to filtering to a very substantial network filter level, both in terms of public Wi-Fi, in terms of ISPs, and actually, in fairness to the mobile networks, they've had PIN systems in place for adult content for more than 5 years. So that is a very substantial change, and I think people often don't bring that all together in one window. And if you look at what's going on right now, you have 4 ISPs, BT, TalkTalk, Virgin Media, and B-Sky-B, who will be providing an unavoidable choice to 19.6 million households in the UK this year. And if you've upgraded, as I have done recently, my ISP package, every single device in your household through that router will be subject to that question or that choice. And that is fairly radical compared to a lot of other countries. And it's driven out of what I think is a context last year in which, for all sorts of reasons, and I think there's some deep psychological and cultural questions around what we do here in the UK, which is to do with Savile and some of the stuff, unfortunately, about celebrities these days, and us, really reflecting on abuse and child abuse and all those kind of aspects. And the PM speech on the 22nd of July of last year at the NSPCC really set out a series of objectives for industry and NGOs and for the UK Council for Child Internet Safety, of which I'm a part and Simon's a part too. So I think we do need to sort of set that context. I think the other point as well is this isn't just a technology response. The 4 ISPs are spending £25 million per annum over 3 years on probably one of the largest internet safety campaigns ever seen in the world. And as an institute, we have 30 industry board members on our board, including Facebook and others. And so we track most of this activity around the world. There's nowhere else in the world that's going on right now. And Fozie's been part of that editorial board, and that will really spearhead the guidance elements to the ISP's part. So back in October, I was asked by the PM's office to chair the overblocking working group, and the statement that was made on the 22nd of July last year talked about we need to make sure that filters do not, even unintentionally, restrict the helpful and often educational content for young people. And I think that's an interesting point, because when you do a very significant degree of network filtering, statistically, overblocking does increase. So I was asked to form that working group, and the first meeting was on the 1st of November. Our second was on the 27th of February. It's probably the largest working group within the UK Council for Child Internet Safety. Currently, there are about 28 representatives, including the Open Rights Group, BBFC, Facebook, and many, many more. And actually, that's part of the process. One of the challenges when I first went out in terms of chairs in this working group is, what is the extent of the problem with overblocking? And there's an awful lot of anecdotal evidence and there's an awful lot of concern from all sorts of bodies, but it was very difficult to get a handle on that. And people like the Open Rights Group and others are very knowledgeable in this area, and the BBFC, and they've been very helpful, and they're part of the working group. Our next meeting is on the 11th of July, and during July we will implement a reporting process for the 4 ISPs. Their whole home filtering solution will then be subject to a reporting process around the inadvertent blocking of content for minors. It's a very, very complex area. And I know from experience dealing within the Commission and other countries just how complex. Most countries have just swerved the issue completely. But if we're going to get a balanced implementation of filters, and Ofcom is going to report at this at the end of the year, we need to understand the issue and we need to try and unpack what is a complex subject. So I have the support of people like the NSPCC, CHIS, YouthNet, Brook, fantastic charities who are coming up with great ideas about how we enable young people to access the content that they trust and support, right the way through to things like Childline and Samaritans. How do we deal with that in an environment where there's whole home filtering? Big, big challenge. And it's complex. You go along to some of these charities and see some of the microsites and community sites that they support. And it astounds me just the degree to which young people are now really living their lives online, but also seeking support just from their peers and from people they trust. And so we have, I think, a duty of care to try and make sure that those channels stay open as much as is possible. Having said that, some of the URLs they use and some of the language that's used in those community sites is so offensive that any standard use of filtering is going to fail because it's just not nuanced or sensitive enough. So we have to work a bit with categorization companies, and the ISPs have been very sensitive to try and work that. So we're in the very formative stages of, I think, a really important project, and I think by the end of the year, with the support of all the stakeholders in the working group, we can make some good progress. If we'd not done it, I would say we would be dumbing down some of the best aspects of the UK digital market around online safety and the ability of these charities to give children and young people the kind of trusted advice they need. And so I think that's really important. Thank you.
Thanks very much, David. So to quote 2012, that's all good then, or is it? Let's hear from Jim as to whether or not this is a national experiment that he feels proud that we're undertaking. Jim.
So I think we've got to say 2 things. Firstly, clearly parents are going to want to use filters, and that's their right. But secondly, if they are using filters, they should know whether they're any good, how good they are, whether it's really true, as David Cameron says, that they can provide one click to safety, or whether in fact they're a bit more like lipstick on a pig kind of situation, whether it's not such a great tool and is going to come with problems. The big problem we see at the moment is that we don't really know how much of a problem these areas, this filtering is in fact. The fact that we've got a piece of research on child safety and we're uncovering many, many problems in that, I think shows that we're likely to actually find lots of other areas where filtering is very inadequate, very crude and over-blocking, which just haven't yet come to light. There are some things I think we can observe which are improvements. I think the BBFC's classifications and the mobile operators adopting those is actually a significant improvement because they're no longer doing things like routinely blocking forums or blogs merely on the basis that comments are placed on those blogs and those are unpoliced, and that's what mobile operators were doing 9 months ago. So that's good that there is less blocking. What is bad is that default blocking is still the routine on mobile phones. It's very hard often to take filtering off. I'm told, although I don't have complete verification of this, that on some mobile providers, pay-as-you-go phones, it's more or less impossible or extremely difficult to limit filtering on some of those contracts. But right at the moment, we just don't have very good evidence about how much is being blocked or how much is not. Open Rights Group have run a website for a couple of years now called blocked.org.uk, where we've collected reports from people when they've encountered excessive blocking. And they've been from the appalling through to the amusing. They've included church websites as well as commercial websites, jewellers, people who are selling tobacco pipes, because tobacco can't be sold to minors, all kinds of examples where the blocking has just shown itself to be extremely crude. But what we don't, or at least haven't up to this point had, is very good evidence of precisely what's happening. Tomorrow, Open Rights Group is relaunching blocked.org.uk, and what we have done with the new site is provided a tool for everyone to do lookups to find out if any particular website is being blocked on any of the mobile phone operators or the 4 main ISP carriers. So if you go to blocked.org.uk tomorrow, type in a URL to that website, it will very quickly check its own database and then send off requests to a number of probes, each one on each network, and it will tell you whether a website is blocked or not. Now, to my mind, it's a disgrace that the Open Rights Group have had to build this tool. That should be something that you're able to find out as of right. Because if your website, your business, your free speech is being blocked for no good reason, you should be able to find that out. And the fact that companies have not provided us with that up to this point, with the one exception of O2, who pulled their checker before Christmas because too many people were using it and complaining about the blocks, nobody else has bothered, and we've had to build that. I don't think that solves a problem of blocking at all, but what it does is it means we can start to have a slightly more sensible debate about what precisely is happening. And a few things have come to light. We've indexed the first 100,000 websites that on Alexa, so Alexa's top 100,000 websites. We found that 19% of those websites are affected by blocking by 1 or more companies. 19%, that's more or less 1 in 5 websites are being blocked by 1 or more carriers. That's a lot. The company that's blocking the most by the kind of default arrangements, if you switch them on as a parent, is TalkTalk, blocking around 15% of the internet on their categories. And the mobile companies, as a result of the BBFC's changes, are the least at around 4.5%. But even with those, what you do see is extreme inconsistency. So one mobile company maybe blocks around 4%, another blocks around 4.5%. Now, you know, if you do the mathematics, you think, well, what's 4.5%? You know, that's of 100,000. I'm not going to try and do all the maths on the top of my head, but you can see that there's that level of variation means that there's significant over or under blocking by each of the mobile companies, and that should be a worry to people on the basis of either child safety or censorship, because both are clearly occurring. You know, they're not providing the same results, so there is clearly something going wrong there. So that's the kind of headlines. As I say, we'll be able to see more tomorrow. I think some other observations I'd just make about the kind of filtering we're seeing. The setup that ISPs have got is whole home filtering, and I don't think that's particularly appropriate. If parents want to block websites for their children, as I say, that may well be something that they need to do, but when you're talking around 15 to 20% of the internet being blocked and that being routinely applied to parents and adults, I think that is a significant harm. So I don't think that's a particularly good thing. I'm also quite worried by the pressure for blocking. We've heard about the immense investment from ISPs into these products. That's happening, and then there's now pressure to recoup that investment. How do you show you're recouping your investment? You get everyone to switch the filters on. So we're seeing a lot of advertising, a lot of push for these things to be switched on. If people don't understand that these things are going to block very large amounts of material, they're going to disrupt parts of their internet experience, that they are not fail-safe, then they are kind of being misled, and we're going to see harms that are not necessary. I think this debate does need to be restricted back towards how we separate the protection of children from what happens when lots of adults live with, whether voluntary or not, a form of censorship. I could go into personal examples. I'm not sure that it's worth doing too much, but I would just quote one person who again, this will all be on the website tomorrow. She was trying to access Jezebel.com, which I believe is still blocked on at least one website, one operator. And she was really embarrassed when she had to ring up 3 to get the block lifted. She says, it was an arduous process and very embarrassing. The manager told me that I couldn't access filtered articles without entering a 4-digit PIN every time I wanted to read a filtered article because I had a pay-as-you-go plan. She says, when her son gets older, she wants to have conversations with her child about what really goes on the internet, and she doesn't think that she can rely on filters. And I think that, again, is a very important point. A lot of the politicians have just told parents that they can rely on filters, and that is simply untrue. So I think that gives you a bit of an overview. I hope you go to blocked.org.uk, check your own websites tomorrow. I think we'll have a bit of a debate over the next couple of weeks as people start to find what is and isn't blocked, and we can start have a proper conversation about how appropriate that is. Thank you.
Jim, thank you very much. Well done, panel, for keeping to time. It means we've got lots of time for discussion. I thought it might be good to start off by asking people for questions or comments about some of the practicalities we've heard about before we broaden the discussion into what does this mean for the broader internet governance debate, including how we and others might talk about what's going on in terms of the UK national experiment. How much of a spotlight do we want to be thrown on it? How much of a spotlight do we expect to be thrown on it, given what David said about the kind of lack of understanding about it at the Brussels level. But I'm also in your hands. So this session is what you make it. So please, who'd like to kick off? Gentlemen, about 3 rows from the back on the left-hand side. You can just introduce yourself and then go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, it's Robin Wilton from the Internet Society. I am ashamed to say that in my household I've got alcohol, spirits, I've got razor blades, I've got paracetamol, prescription drugs, lots of things. I haven't got any cigarettes, but lots of things that are age-controlled. But despite that, my children seem to have made it to maturity without having suffered any harm from those. In none of those areas does the government see fit to reach into my household and control what I do. It seems strange to me that they take this duty upon themselves for internet access, especially since, how can I put this, the areas of consent are all opt-in, and here I'm expected to opt in explicitly to something inside my household. It seems a very odd overreach for the government to insist on. They don't have any problem, I've noticed, in working out how old my children are when it comes to collecting national insurance contributions from them. Mysteriously, on their 16th birthday, a letter from the HMRC arrives. And yet they seem to have a problem telling whether my children are over 18 or not. Again, it's a strange overreach, and I don't understand the schizophrenia on this.
So, Robin, that feels more like a contribution to the debate rather than a specific question, which is fine. Maybe unless others do want to come in on that. Well, Dave wants to come in it. So, I mean, just to be clear, we did invite the ISPs to come and sit on the platform. They didn't furnish us with their presence. Nonetheless, I still think we can have a very good debate about it. I'll ask Dave what he thinks.
Yeah, very, very interesting points about alcohol, tobacco, and razor blades, those kind of things. When we took over the role in relation to adult filters with the mobile networks, all this kind of content was blocked, although it was kind of schizophrenic because you'd have an off-licence that was blocked, but Tesco, which sold alcohol and all these other age-restricted goods, wasn't. So when we took over the role, we had some discussions with other regulators and with law enforcement and with the operators to find out, well, is this the right approach, and how do we go about dealing with age-restricted goods? And the collective conclusion we came to is that sites that offer age-restricted goods should not be blocked. So the default setting is that they're not blocked because it's not harmful for a child to see a bottle of wine or to see a packet of cigarettes. What's harmful is the child to be able to buy and consume that kind of material. And there are other mechanisms in place, including laws, that prevent them from buying it. So we felt it's not harmful for them to see it. The harm is consumption, so the blocks of all those sites no longer apply. I think the only adult sites, the only age-restricted, the only sites that sell age-restricted goods or services that are blocked are ones where the site itself is potentially harmful, so pornography would be blocked. But alcohol, tobacco, the rest aren't.
I mean,
that's only the mobile operators. The ISPs, I'm not sure how.
David, I mean, you've engaged a lot with the fixed line ISPs. That's not the model. I mean, myself as a BT customer, having switched my home hub, I saw an enormous range of things that were blocked under these different categories. So they've got up to a very different model from the mobile operators. Do you know why? Can you shed some insights on that?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I think the challenge for the ISPs is that they basically have different products, some of which are integrated into broader internet security products or even TV products. So when they come to integrate this kind of technology into those, how that looks can be often quite different. And also they use different content categorization providers as well. So it is a challenge to get all 4 ISPs to respond in the same way. Indeed, you know, TalkTalk has had a home-safe solution and has been a core part of its proposition for many years, well prior to this. And for those people that want a family-safe experience, that's been very, very good. So it does create complexities. I think the truth too is that between November and February, the 3 ISPs that were to follow then deployed. They've been refining the way that those categories work. They've been taking a lot of feedback from users and been developing and refining those. So, you know, I think that they'll evolve over time. I think they did a very smart thing in the early stages, which is really initially only offer it to new users, which is a relatively small number. Now you will see a much more proactive approach of approaching the existing subscriber base. And I think within that they'll learn a lot and they'll bed those products down and they'll do pretty well. The other point I would say too is that these products and categorization engines are in other countries around the world, but typically you have to pay for them, $30, $40, $50. One of the things that's often forgotten is that these filters are provided for free. And then the other element to this as well, which I think will be part of the Internet Matters proposition, and certainly I found it when I came to do the installation, is that this is a single, quick option to protect the family. But there are a lot of people that will decide on a device-side solution. Maybe they've got a 6, a 12, and a 15-year-old, and they may actually consider that to be a better option. That's the case in my own case. So I think this is one of a number of choices they can make.
Jim, do you want to add anything on that, or should we take more questions?
Just really briefly, there are huge variations in the categories and the way the categories work, and that is what's leading to a lot of the problems, I think. It is good that the mobile companies have scaled back what they're providing, but I do think that the companies should look at the defaults that they're pushing, bearing in mind they are kind of defaults. So if somebody's switching on something and they're blocking alcohol and tobacco, I'm not really sure that that's an appropriate kind of block for a standard family setup. And I think they're being hugely overcautious in some instances.
Thank you. So we've got a question near the front here, then there's another one at the back. So let's take the question near the front first.
Thank you. Hear me? Good. Christian Laranaga. I've got a number of hats here. So it's from a parent through to Internet Society community to being an advisor for Wired Kids and another number of NGOs involving terrorized children over the years. I'm intrigued really by this whole internet filtering debate in the UK. It's been intriguing for a variety of reasons. It's kind of I've not been able to understand it. Actually, I haven't understood the arguments, and somehow it's sort of clarified a bit, having the presentations today. So thank you for coming along. It seems to me that what's happening is we have a broadcast model. Okay, so we're taking a kind of broadcast model of content, and the problem is that there are these bad broadcasters, and they're broadcasting bad stuff to people who are considered vulnerable. And the definition of vulnerable is predefined as well as to why they're vulnerable, their age or whatever. In Wild Kids, some research was done with Parry Aftab's group and in Canada, and it's been very interesting to see that actually the major problem, when you actually talk to teenagers and younger people, isn't actually this model at all. Completely misses the point. The real threat actually is within their age groups or close age groups. That's the thing that they're most concerned about. And they tend to be actually very good about talking about it to each other as well, if they're given the means. Having brought up children here in the UK, I would say that, yes, there is potential problem with broadcast content. They can be mitigated quite easily, normally. It's where it's not, and that's the difficult thing to catch and understand. But I'm not convinced that we've got this right in the UK, and I'm particularly concerned by hearing from people in Westminster that Number 10 have basically closed the door on this. And so it's now over to the industry, you clever guys in the industry, to fix what are basically technical problems. I don't see these as technical problems, actually. I mean, there are technical problems. These are actually definitional problems as to what is the problem we're trying to solve. And I'm not clear about that.
Thank you very much, Christian. I don't think, again, great contribution. I might get the panel to respond, but let's take up some more contributions as well. So there's somebody over here, I can't actually see, I can just about see your face. Perhaps you could stand up and tell us who you are and I shall make your point.
Carsten Maple, University. Yeah. I've met David before, and the great work that FOSI does. I just do have an issue with one of the points you made there about it's a simple click to protect the family. And I think one thing that we have to be clear about is if we're on about protecting the family, protecting children, this is one of the tools, one of the ways. We need to educate the children, because if we put all these filters in place, and they are effective, we solve all those problems of overblocking, there are still other ways that kids can get around the blocking. If there's a password they can work out, they see parents type in that 4-digit PIN or whatever control there might be, they can go to other places, and we have to understand that this technological solution is one part of the whole answer to this problem. I'd like to know the panel's views on that.
Okay, let's take one more contribution, then I'll come back to the panel. I think, actually, the chap in the green shirt was next, and then I'm going to come to the people on the right-hand side after that. Did I make the wrong call there? Was there somebody else who had their hand up further back?
Well, I'll be brief anyway. 3 very quick things I'd like to know the panel's view on the blocking of. First of all, and it links very much to the previous question, VPN sites. Do you consider they should be blocked? Secondly, how do you manage when there are multiple sites on the same server and therefore the same IP address? And finally, what are your thoughts on the blocking of malware using this technology? Should malware be blocked from end users? And indeed, which is more important, blocking malware or blocking content?
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go to Jim first in terms of responding to those contributions.
I very much agree with the idea that this is a social problem rather than a technology problem or anything else. And I think it's important to realise if you push a social problem to technologists to fix, then they're not actually going to fix it. And I think the rhetoric around this whole debate has been really, it's been a political recognition that there are worried parents, a wish to make parents feel like the government is doing something for them without the government actually spending any money or doing anything within its own purview to fix the problems, and therefore punting it to the ISPs to sort out and then essentially washing their hands of it. If the government was very serious about this, we would be seeing a lot more in education. We'd be seeing initiatives to help teachers talk to children in schools about this, and that's deemed the next thing when they get round to it, rather than something where I think that is right at the top of the priority. And I think that shows a lot about what's really going on here. I think that it is also true that children can get round filters and parents are not having that explained to them. And I think it's also true that children are disrupted by filters in various ways. Common reason that filters don't get switched on, I think, is often that children complain that various sites they need for their homework are getting blocked, and it just becomes a nuisance to keep whitelisting sites that children need access to. That's another good reason for keeping filters minimal rather than maximal. So for all those reasons, I think we do need a far more sophisticated debate, and we need to stop assuming that we can rely on technology to fix a problem. VPN sites, no, they shouldn't be blocked, though of course that does enable potentially children to get around filters, but I'm afraid they're going to do that anyway. Then on the malware, I'm not less, I don't have such a strong view on that. I guess the question is how much the technology blocks or creates other problems as a result of attempting to block malware, and whether that respects people's privacy in the kind of ways it indexes and tries to find that malware.
Okay, David, do you want to talk to Christian's point about kind of how did this all come about? Why has the UK gone down this route when it's not been followed by other countries? What is it about the context here?
No, I think it's a good question. It's just a personal view, but and certainly if you look at the sort of sequence of events last year, particularly around the Jimmy Savile situation, and the whole climate right now in the UK, and Claire Perry's campaign around porn and the Daily Mail's activities in terms of a campaigning approach to hardcore content. And you could definitely see last year when Peter Davis at CEOP in May actually went on primetime TV and said, look, we know that many of these people are pursuing illegal content, child sexual abuse material, are accessing these environments through general search, and they're also moving very heavily into peer-to-peer and Tor. And I think for a lot of people in this space, and Susie's with us here from the RWF, that was a big shift in people's perspective, because the IWF has a fantastic reputation in this area, world-leading role in the reporting and dealing with this kind of content. But that was against a backdrop of just a general sense, I think, in the UK public specifically, that content was becoming more sexualised, more commoditised, and that's very much a UK context in which that all played out. And with all these notable celebrities, even the one that was convicted yesterday, you know, people are just very concerned about these kind of issues, even pre-internet issues around child abuse and child sexual abuse. So I think that set up the context for the PM's speech and the action of, you know, a lot of stakeholders, clearly under a lot of pressure from the government to do something. I'll go back to an earlier comment I made. I found it absolutely astonishing how little reported it was, the gains that we've made in the CSAM area right now, that actually 100,000 search terms in 158 countries are now are actually being blocked in CSAM environments, and that came out of the UK. The effect on autofill as well to stop those kind of things. And whilst it's not bulletproof, I saw figures in November which indicated there was a 20% drop in searching terms around CSAM to things like Google and Bing within a month of that being implemented. So that on-ramp to that environment was being dealt with. And that was not really very widely talked about, but the most abhorrent of content, as I think received a huge injection, and Susie can talk more about that, but even in the areas of peer-to-peer, where industry is helping to fund a much more forensic approach to those kind of areas. So taken along with all of the stuff that's going on with the ISPs and in public Wi-Fi, it's a pretty big set of initiatives, all of which are being deployed right now. Talk about this in other countries, and it's interesting, you know, in France and Germany. I mean, Germany, for example, you couldn't do network filtering. It's just not culturally what they would do there. It's just not the way they go about it. The debate is totally different. And different countries have different responses to it. But it doesn't mean that the UK's approach is no less valid. I just think it reflects the cultural context last year, and we'll get some things right and we'll probably get some things wrong. But I do believe that overall, at least we're trying to do things, whereas what I do see in a lot of other countries is them sort of just acting in a steady state and leaving it to people to find out for themselves. And I think to Jim's point too, education is really key. I think that's really important. In September, I know there's e-safety and code stuff coming into the curriculum. That's a start. Internet Matters will have a very heavy educational element in back to school. So they're small steps, but I think they're a start, and I think Jim's point is absolutely right.
Because we like controversy, Jim wants to come back at David, so I'll let him do that briefly.
Firstly, what has child abuse images got to do with children accessing inappropriate content? I mean, the fact that these two things have got conflated to this extent puts us in completely the wrong place to have a rational conversation. If we start off with worrying about children being raped and then start to apply our logic and fears of that to how we deal with children's online experience, then we are not going to have a sensible conversation. And the level of ridiculousness this has got to is that if I, as I've just done, put into Google, I apologise for the inappropriate phrase, but I put into my Google search David Cameron child porn, I get at the top of my results a warning: child abuse imagery is illegal. Now, clearly that's not what I'm searching for, but that is the result of the policy changes that we had debated last year. I get warned when I search for David Cameron's views that I might be about to do something illegal.
Thank you, Jim. Okay. Do you want to come in now, Kate? And then I will take the two gentlemen on this side.
Yes, sorry. The thing that worries me most of all, I spent much of the last sort of 2 years arguing against network filtering, and I may as well have been shouting into a vacuum at the end of the day. But the thing that really concerns me now is the statistic actually from you, Jim, is that 1 in 5 websites, on average, are being blocked in some kind of way in this over-blocking. I'm curious to know whether or not the website that you're setting up, is it going to be gathering material? Because I really think now is the time for some really robust research so that people actually, instead of just speaking from a place of fear and political posturing and whatever else is, garnering the attention of the nation, but actually get some solid statistics on it now and see what kind of a difference it's making for the good and for the bad in those poor businesses that are getting blocked and their business just sort of like throttled because of this.
And we'll come back to you, Jim, in a sec. So let's take Alex. You had a question? The mic's coming to you. Then I'll come to you.
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask a question rather than make a disguised statement. It always strikes me that with any of these kinds of things, the test of the credibility of the approach is actually determined not by 98% or 90% of what's passing through the process, but actually the tricky corner cases. And in particular, I think it was very interesting this was touched upon a couple of times, that there are some difficult judgments that have to be made about, for instance, is the site promoting anorexia as an acceptable lifestyle, or is it actually providing helpful guidance to people who suffer from that condition? Those kinds of judgments, it feels to me, are extremely difficult to make using a network level filter. So I'm very, because it's all about context, it's actually about eyeballs on, to understand the context and to understand the intent behind the content and how that will be received by the audience. So I guess my question is, leaving aside the kind of crass over-blocking problems that Jim's being identified, if we assume that we actually get to the point where we have more or less effective filters, how do we deal with those difficult corner cases in a way which is actually scalable and provides robust and legitimate judgments about where the balance of interest lies case by case?
Thank you. Okay, we'll have another question. Have you got a mic? Or you need Alex's?
Sorry.
Thank you. Khaled Fatal, the Multilingual Internet Group. I'm actually pleased to hear about the initiatives and factoring this within the context of UK versus the world. We are at a UK IGF event, and the perspective is UK and also the rest of the world. I might find value in a lot of the initiatives that sort of like congregated the different ISPs to work together on something. I might disagree on certain matters, but as an initiative, I think it's an excellent starting point. In itself, it is not sufficient. Because when we look at the next internet ecosystem that we are entering into as we speak, and the speed of which the change is impacting or will impact our lives and the lives of people around the world, and the next billion internet users coming from emerging markets and different language communities and different codes as well, the challenge is going to be enormous. And I think perhaps taking the model of this cooperation and fine-tuning what works and what doesn't work and taking it to the next level is probably key. Filtering is only one component. I think somebody, Kate mentioned the educational element. Education is critical. You might go, we may be comparing, let's say, UK with Germany. But what if we compare UK with Middle Eastern countries, African countries, Asian countries? We are going to have a safer internet as long as the full chain is strong. One weak link is going to be the force for bad. That will take place. It will come up because the opportunity will have exponentially expanded for them. So I think it's definitely a next step forward, but I think also it needs to be taken to the context to the international community, and which is partly what we are doing at the same time. And this could be part of the beacon that can be taken elsewhere.
Okay,
thank you.
I'll come back to you, Malcolm. Let's ask the panel briefly, because we are getting close to time, just to come back on the particular questions from Kate and from Alex. Then I would like one more quick round around these issues of how, is it something we feel proud of when we go to the IGF in Istanbul, or is it something we hope people don't ask us questions about? But if you could perhaps just quickly respond to the questions from Kate and from Alex.
Okay. So there was a few questions there. I'll try and answer those that I feel capable of answering, but some very good questions all the same. Certainly within the working group there's a very strong research component to the working group, and working with the NSPCC, Brook, YouthNet, CHIS, we're doing some really in-depth research into young people's circumvention techniques and how they do that, the degree to which they do it, and their perceptions of filters. And we think that will be very, very interesting. And then you've got to balance that against, if you've got a 15-year-old and they really don't want to talk to their parents and they have a life crisis that really matters to them, how do they deal with that? So, I'm confident that we've got some charities that can help us try and think about some new ways of doing that. So I think that's really important. I think the research will really inform our thinking. I think the other thing that I would say too is that we're not sure at the end of the year in terms of overblocking how the whole landscape will look. In other words, we have a mobile ecosystem and we have an ISP and Wi-Fi thing, and I think there is an argument which says we need to look at that as a whole and just what's the continuity between those three? What is a UK citizen's perspective on a day-to-day basis across those three environments? So I think later in the year we should be looking at that, trying to get some commonality of approach, and ensure that we continue to do the research as well to make sure that we understand, not just through Ofcom but through our own research and through the working groups, what is the public's perception of this filtering? Do they think it's a good thing? Not necessarily just do they think it makes it safer, but do they think it makes the internet a better place, not only just for their children but for the whole family? So I think we're at the beginning of a journey.
Okay, Dave, do you want to come back particularly on this issue about making those kind of really difficult context judgments?
Yeah, absolutely. Really good point about the difficult cases. It's working. We're already dealing with the difficult cases. It's been really noticeable that the really, as I was saying earlier, the really easy ones are now being dealt with by the MNOs, and we're only getting the difficult ones. That's fine for us, that's what we do. We make these contextual judgments all the time in relation to film and video and other content. I'll just give you a quick example of one of the hardest cases we had. It's a website called Dignity in Dying, which had been put behind adult filters on the grounds that it was, the filter thought that it was a pro-suicide site. And Dignity in Dying came to us and said, well, we don't think it is, please take a look. So we did take a look, and it was quite a long and convoluted process which involved us getting legal advice as well. But we concluded that Dignity in Dying was not a pro-suicide site. It was quite a responsible site. It was advocating a change in UK law about assisted dying. It didn't advocate suicide. In fact, there was guidance for people that were feeling suicidal on the site saying, call the Samaritans, call your local GP. Very responsible. And we had the filter removed in that case because we felt it's the kind of topic that children are learning about as part of their GCSE studies, the whole ethics around it. So that's an example of the kind of difficult case that we've dealt with, and you can see other examples in our quarterly report. I think the difficult issue is scalability. Now, we spent a long time on that one website, really a long time. If we had hundreds and thousands of these, it would be very difficult for us to cope with. So far, we've had about 20 complaints in 9 months. Now, I don't know if that's representative. It's certainly very easily manageable from our point of view, but we don't know how many people know about the service that we offer. We're advertising as wide as we can, and the Open Rights Group has pushed people in our direction as well. So it'd be really interesting to get the results of Jim's research to find, well, are we just dealing with the tip of the iceberg in terms of difficult cases, or are we actually dealing with a good proportion of difficult cases? So I would hope that Jim would continue to point people towards us in those cases.
Jim, given you got 2 bites last time, I'm just going to ask you to hold off. I think when it comes to this issue about how did this happen, the point that Christy, I think one of the interesting questions is how come people didn't really ever complain about filtering on mobile broadband? That was an accepted part of how mobile broadband has been since the early days, and yet when it came to fixed and whole home and network-based solutions, there's been a really big debate about it. I mean, perhaps not elsewhere in the world, but certainly in the UK, and that's a really interesting question about why that's the case, the difference between kind of feel like an individual broadband experience or internet experience and a collective one. What I'd like to do, we've got 5 more minutes. I know we don't vote at the IGF, and this is not a vote, but I'd be interested to know, I'd be really, sorry? I'd be really interested to know whether people feel this is something that when those of people who are hoping or are going to the IGF in Istanbul, who here is going to feel proud to be able to talk about the UK experience? That doesn't necessarily mean you think we've done the right thing, but you think what we've created is something that we ought to be talking about and having a dialogue about it. Who's going to feel proud about it? Who's going to feel embarrassed or ashamed and want to avoid it? Okay. And who's undecided or not prepared to commit? Okay, that's interesting. So I'd say, on balance, there are probably more people here who feel that they're rather embarrassed about what the UK has done and would rather that people don't ask them about and rather talk about IPv6 instead. Fine. Let's just see. Any further quick contributions to the people who I haven't called? I've got Ian, Malcolm, Susie. I'm going to ask you just to speak for 30 seconds because I do want to give the panellists 30 seconds each as well before the end. Did I miss anybody on this side who had their hand up as well? Okay, so we've got a kind of a line of people actually, let's do Susie first, and then Malcolm, and then Ian.
There you go. Okay, very quickly, thanks very much for this. And obviously you all know the IWF just filters criminal content. But the reason I'm proud about it, and I'm on the UKIS board as well, is because actually it's about multi-stakeholder working. And actually we might have got some things wrong. And I hate the conflation between the access to adult content and nobody should have access to criminal content. And I think that's been misused. But actually we are trying to do something, and we've created a model in the UK where we do all sit around the table together, government, law enforcement, industry, civil society, and we actually talk about these issues. So I think we do have something to be really proud of.
Actually, like Alex, I had a genuine question. I don't know if there's still time for the panel to answer it.
As long as it's really quick, Mark.
Well, it was basically, in the work that I've done with the IWF over the years, I've been very impressed by the work that they put into the training of their assessors and the processes they have in place for review of assessors' work to ensure consistency in their work, both in terms of adherence to the IWS policy on assessment and internal consistency, but from one to another. And I wondered if the panel could enlighten us more about that with regard to in the non-IWF space, in the adult content space.
Great, thank you. Can you pass the mic back, guys, towards Ian Twin, who's about 3 more rows back. Ian, if you could be brief. Put your hand up again, Ian. I thought you had a question, Ian. No, I oh, sorry, no, you're not in. I do apologise. I got you mixed up with someone.
Yes. Sorry. Philip Virgo. One of the areas...
Sorry, Philip. Yep. I do apologise.
Yes. One of the areas where I think we probably can be proud of, and which are interesting, we had the comment that we need to do more about education rather than filtering, but we've got a lot of education programs in this area, which I think we can be proud of. One of the big issues, though, is supporting them to get to critical mass. I'm thinking here of the things by ChildNet, the Cyber Champions programs, getting people into schools and so on. And we've got a lot to be proud of there, and I think we should be prouder of them.
Thank you very much, Philip. I do apologise for mixing you up with the esteemed Ian Twin as well. Okay, 30 seconds each. Let's kick off with Jim.
Our evidence will be freely available, open licensed for download tomorrow, so you can start there. I want to just say something on the corner cases. The problem with corner cases is the individual, not the website. Is the use that an individual makes of that content, not the content itself. And that will lead to problems because some people might, for instance, want to access inappropriate material because they're, for instance, exploring their sexuality, or maybe they're trying to find help from pro-anorexia people on a pro-anorexia site, and that is the way that they first seek help and realise that something's wrong. Just by stopping people accessing it doesn't mean that you actually solve the problems for the individuals concerned. You may make things worse, and I think we have to be very conscious of that as we push this. And also, I think we need to remember filtering, you can't stop people avoiding it. That said, people will get around it, and let's just remember it is not in any way a massive solution to this. It is a part of some way that parents can hope to use things, but the more that they rely on it, the worse situation we're in.
Thank you. David.
I concur with Susie's point, actually. I think what's very unusual here in the UK is the sort of non-political and sort of middle ground there is. There's an amazing amount of charities here in the UK that most other countries would actually die for in terms of just their sheer capability, provenance and consistency in dealing with issues like child sexual abuse over more than a decade. So I think we should be proud of that stakeholder approach. I think the Tanya Byrons and the Bailey reviews are all a contribution towards a momentum and a narrative we have in the UK that we should be proud of. And although I haven't been to IGF in recent years, although I did Sharm el-Sheikh, Vilnius and Nairobi, I would say we have a lot to be proud of, and it is a very good news story. It isn't, however, a story that we can tell without, faults and problems, but it is very multi-stakeholder, and there is generally a will to do something about it, which I think is lacking in some other regions.
Thank you. And Dave, as well as summing up, can you just briefly address Malcolm's point as well about the training of the assessors?
Sure. Like Susie and IWF, we have quite robust and intensive training. I joined the BBFC as an examiner, like an IWF assessor, and it was about 4 or 5 months of solid training. It's the best training I ever had, actually, in any job, before I was allowed to loose with any piece of content on my own. We have that. We have the guidelines, which are essentially our Bible. This is what the public has told us is acceptable at the different age categories, and we have to relate all our classification decisions to those guidelines. Every decision that we make, every recommendation by an examiner is reviewed by a senior manager. So we have lots of checks and balances in place to make sure that everything that we do is consistent. And both the guidelines and the framework for the mobile, that sets the mobile standards, are published documents. So I think if anyone felt that we were deviating from those standards, please, I'm sure they would let us know.
Thank you very much, Dave. Well, I now have another reason as to why I suggested this panel, which I think has led to a really good debate. I hope you found it informative, and I'd like you please to thank the panellists in the usual way. Okay, I'm handing the mic, not the Kate, to Mike.